Martin Luther's Reformation. He was the main leader in the Lutheran Reformation, but before that, Martin Luther was born in Isenburg, 120 miles away from Berlin, to Hans and Margaret Luther. Luther was born to a poor-born father who worked himself rich in the mines. So his father decided to send him to law school to become a lawyer, a decision gladly made in the future. When Luther was only 13, he went to the University of Erfurt. There, Luther gained both his bachelorette and master's degree in the shortest time he could. He was very skilled at public debates and nicknamed the philosopher. But one night he was on his way back from drinking. He was caught in a terrible storm. Luther was terrified and cried out, "Help me, St. Annie, and I will become a monk." And so, as he promised, that is what he did.
That sort of revolutionary, rebellious nature in the background of Martin Luther. There's nothing which gives you the indication this was a man destined to confront the Catholic Church or change European history.
But at 21, Luther commits his first act of rebellion, leaving his family and his studies to become an Augustinian monk.
As I go on, you'll hear my interview with Senior Pastor Lyle while I explain a little more about Luther. How did Martin Luther's Reformation affect religions today?
Opened up a whole new category of religious exploration, kind of, so to speak. And what that means is that because of his and other people's efforts, people were not locked into having to toe the line of the Roman Catholic Church of its day. So the Lutherans, named for Luther, sort of began that. There were others as well. The Reformed tradition that became Presbyterians, for example, and other traditions also were formed, and they all then were able to interpret Scripture and faith that in ways that made sense to them.
Okay. Many historians say that his Reformation kind of led us more into the modern era. Would you go off of that or agree with it?
Well, he certainly did in several ways. One result of the Reformation was that the nation states became more powerful. And it seems like, well, what does that have to do with the Reformation? Well, in northern Germany, it was the states, the provinces, if you will, that supported the Reformation. And because they didn't want to pay taxes to Rome, they didn't want to pay their church taxes. And so they then supported these Reformation movements as they developed. And that was very true with Luther. He owed his life to one of the governors of one of those provinces. So that's one thing that really made a difference in sort of the politics and the political organization of the day. Another thing the Reformation did was, in many ways, to, I don't want to say piggyback on or help support, but it happened in that sort of large general area of the Renaissance. It was part of that in a way. And so the Reformation further encouraged people to think for themselves religiously. He encouraged people to read Scripture in their own language, and therefore he was one of the first translators, if not the first translator, I believe, of the Bible from the Greek and the Hebrew into, in this case, German. Okay, so that everyone could read Scripture in his or her own language. So that was another major piece. And he also, though it certainly, let me start over with that one. The Reformation was able to be successful because of the Gutenberg press, the printing press. The other way to look at it is to say the Reformation made very clear how powerful the press could be, the mass-produced tracts and publishings that went on. And that's how Luther's work got around. Someone saw it, put it on a printing press, they printed a bunch and distributed. So it really opened the back and forth. It kind of opened the way for each other. Those are at least three different ways, opened some ways of communication. Yeah.
You also mentioned that there were like reformers. I read about how he kind of mocked some of them. Were there other ones that like worked with him?
Oh yeah, there were a number of them, maybe not quite so well known, but John Calvin, for example, worked with Luther and was one of the signers of the Augsburg Confession, I believe, which was one of our basic Lutheran and Reformation documents. So it was Calvin. You had a number of other folks, lesser known, one in particular, Philip Melanchthon, who did a lot of the writing in the later Reformation work. So there were others, and there were many who supported him. There were differences among some of the reformers that supported him, and that he couldn't buy everything that he was promoting. But some of those groups have been coming back. For example, the Moravians, who are basically in many ways Lutheran. They use the Lutheran Catechism, for example. Well, we're back in full fellowship with them now after 400, 500 years, but we never really broke fellowship with them either. They were supporters, but not 100%. So we had a number of those folks, a number of those groups as well.
Okay, thanks.
I know.
In a bigger picture, Luther's reform unleashed forces that ended the Middle Ages and ushered us into the modern era. It is said that in most libraries there are more books about Luther than any other person except Jesus Christ. Ooh, a picture. Hard to test, one can understand how it is possible.